Hi, welcome back to another Terranscapes video. If you are new to the channel, I just want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And if you are new to this project, I'm going to put a little card up here that will take you to the playlist for this project so that you can see some of the previous videos that discuss exactly what the scope of the project is and how I've gotten here. But today we're going to take a look at the Orc Boss Hut, and I've done a lot of work on it. It has become a much bigger part of the project than I expected, and I'm hoping that the sum of the parts add up to more than the whole, if I have that saying right. So let's go to the bench and I'll show you what I've been up to. So the first thing to talk about is the roof, and it was something that I was really concerned about because it's going to have the main visual impact since most people will be looking down onto the building. And I decided to go with super sculpey, and I sculpted the roof on the flat of the table, and I did that because I was fearful of trying to deal with sculpting it hanging on the rafters themselves. And this is a little mock-up of what the rafters kind of look like. This was a test piece I did out of some balsa wood just to get a sense of the spacing and the general amount of super sculpey that I would need. What I discovered as I was subsequently lifting it off the table and putting it in place is that if I had done individual pieces, it would have fallen apart when I had lifted it up. In fact, because I had to add some pieces on later on, and I made some cuts that I had to fix and then reattach pieces, and so I recognized right away that that would have been probably not the easiest way to go. And trying to add all the stitches and sculpting while it's hanging, very difficult. I did do some of that, but it was not the easiest way to do it. So laying it out on the table made more sense. I was terrified about lifting it off the table and draping it onto the rafters, and in the end it worked out. I was fearful that I'd have to use make a mold of this and then cast it and then lay the casts over it because I was afraid I might damage the master. And as you can imagine, it took me an inordinate amount of time to make this. I won't tell you how long. I did tell my patrons though. The stitches that you see are all copper wire that I coiled and then used wire snippers, very small ones, to snip off half circles, and then I inserted them into the Sculpey while it was on the table using a very fine pair of tweezers that I actually filed down and corrected their shape so I could get a good grab on all of them. That's the process to make it. When I baked it, I did lay it onto the rafters before I baked it, and when I baked it, one of the things that worked out really well was that it slumped a little bit into these areas, and it really made it look like it has a much more natural lay on the rafters. I was working to get that to do it before baking, and it really wasn't working out too well, and it kind of fixed itself after the fact, and I was grateful for that. The problem, however, is that when I baked it, for the rafters, I used epoxy, and I epoxied all of the joints inside in the rafters, thinking that that could withstand the heat and that the rafters wouldn't separate during the baking process. Well, that happened actually. A couple of the rafters broke loose from the cross beam, and if this had collapsed while baking, it would have been ruined. And somehow the Sculpey kind of held the rafters a little bit in place. Everybody kind of worked together to keep that from happening, but it was a catastrophic disaster, narrowly missed, you might say. The entrance to the hut had the same similar situation with the curtain, and the curtain was much more difficult to insert because behind all of these spots is hot glue, and the hot glue was intruding upon where I had expected it to be open. And for the curtain, I also made a little mock-up. So here was the mock-up. So I was making the curtain on the inside here, and this is all open space on the sides, but inside the cavity it was filled with hot glue and foam, and trying to remove that was a nightmare to say the least. But I did get it fit, and I really was happy with the way it folded and made it look, I think, pretty decent fabric especially for me for sort of a first time trying to model fabric in this way. The entrance will also get some bits and stuff added on. I have a whole bunch of things selected. Oh, I didn't even get it out. There's a little skull, cow skull sort of thing that hangs here, and then there will be some bits attached like trophies and that sort of idea. For the walkway, that was a little bit more straightforward, except that I ended up at first using spear tips instead of these sculpted sort of horn-like projections, and the spear tips just didn't work right. They didn't look right, and I ended up, after fiddling with them for quite a while, I ended up pulling all of those off and then sculpting horns. These were made with Procreate epoxy putty, and then I added those in and I dremeled out little spots for the pieces to fit into so it looked like they were part of the deck. And I liked the way they came out, actually. I thought that worked out pretty well. I used a couple of the big stabas for the posts against the building, and if you recall from the beginning of this project, the genesis, that this will be sitting on a cliff, and then this walkway will hang out over the cliff looking down on the troops. And that was originally also planned to have a canopy that would come out, but I had so much difficulty working with the hide skin roof that I decided to abandon the canopy and just go forward from there. The building is built on a foam core base, and the not foam core, the material, a foam core. And the reason I did that was to give it some stability while I was doing the initial construction and laying in all the walls, but also allows me to carve out the foam later, and you could see how I had done that in this area to be able to handle the door, so that I can insert lights and have the lights shining through the windows. These are windows with their coverings, but there's also lots of gaps in the wood, and I thought that might look really nice to have those shining through. So right now I am still planning on going with lighting for this project. I think I can do it in a relatively simple way and not make myself crazy, but bring out what I envisioned for this piece, and some of the other pieces as well. I did some testing on the idol, and I saw the lighting in that. That needs some modification, but it's doable, so we're going to keep moving on that direction. Thinking of the lighting, it will be flickering flames, right, like little campfires or torches or something in there, but I don't want to hear anybody comment about how there's no way for the smoke to escape. Don't tell me. I know there's no way, except they just open up a flap, right? They just open up the flap and let it out. So my wife, Tanya, she pointed that out. She's like, well, where's the smoke going? I'm like, oh, geez, I'm going to get that 1,000 times. I didn't have a good way or idea of how to add a vent for the smoke, and quite frankly, with the difficulty I had with the roof, adding anything to that was strictly out of the question in my mind. No way I was going to modify that. On the outside, all the bits that you see were all modified in some way. There's no bit that came right out of the box and went onto this building. Every single piece has been, at the very least, shaved down to make it thinner so it doesn't sit disproportionately out. You know, you don't want a giant thick board hanging off of it. So all of those were thinned down. All the boards that were cut, every edge had to be cleaned up and rounded to match the original texture. All of the shields and such, of course, had their backings cleaned up so they could be braced up against it. And then, of course, much like the idol, about 1,000 nails went into it, and the nails are made the same way that I made with the idol, which is to cut a piece of brass pinning wire, and then using my Dremel flatten the tip of it so that it would look flat instead of pinched. And I had somebody mention using flush cut pliers to, cut them so you'd end up with a flush end, and that does not work for brass, for metals, because they're going to deform and you end up with a little bit of a pinch point. Higher quality cutters will produce less of a pinch, but the pinch is still going to be there. So I Dremel flat the top surface of every nail that you see before inserting it. And the nice thing about having it be the same size as the pin wire, right, is it's my pinning vise, so I can just get a precise hole to add the pins in for every hole. So the entire piece is literally actually nailed together, as these pins, almost all of them, go right into the second layer or even deeper. The only thing that I was not entirely happy about are using the armatures. These are tree armatures from Woodland Scenics, and I clipped off the branches and decided to use those as sort of like the posts, but they're not the best looking pieces, and there are some marks on them from the manufacturing. I mean, I cleaned them up, but they're probably, I think, the thing I'm most unhappy about. In the one sense, they kind of work, because if they were hyper detailed and very realistic, they really wouldn't match the sort of stylized look of all the other bits. So it's sort of a good and a bad. There's a few things that I might try to clean up or hide later, and I'll know more once I install it. I can put a bush up against some spots, and there's other ways to hide things. So there'll be some of that going on down the road. And the last thing to talk about is the ropes that I'm using. So if you recall from the original drawing, so I abandoned the top canopy here and instead just went straight to the horns to hang the shields from, and they hang down and sort of add a little weight to it. The shields will be attached to these ropes, and this rope is a model ship scale rope, and it was pointed out to me by a listener, and I just want to say thank you so much for that. It's a great, great rope, and I'm actually going to do a quick mini review of them because I don't want to talk about them in detail here, and I want to show them to you in better detail. However, the nice thing about working with them is that A, they have a color that works fairly well, and B, I was able to get a whipped end around the ropes. It's not technically a whipped end, but it's pretty close, and the whipped ends really add a lot of realism to that, and so and when I added glue to these, it didn't distort the color too much. So fantastic. I'm really excited about this rope. I think it's going to make a big difference. I have more of it and in different gauges for going back and reworking the elevator. So you're going to see more of this rope coming up as the project continues to develop. So that gives you a look at the overall work that's been done on the Orc Boss Hut, and let's take it back out. So that gives you a look at the Boss Hut project as it has been ongoing. If you enjoyed that look and you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like or to subscribe. It helps with the rankings on YouTube, and it'd be great to be able to share my work with more people. So that would be a small way to support the channel. And if you want to support the channel a little bit more, you can always become a patron on Patreon. And I have a feeling I do more for my patrons than most people, at least anybody else I've seen. So you know when you become a patron that it's really, really appreciated. Thank you for the consideration, and stay tuned to the channel because I am going to be unveiling some things that I have completed on the Elftown project right after this, and there's a lot to look at. So hopefully you'll come back to see that video, because you know I'll be back soon with another Terranscapes video.